April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France. German pilots laughing at ungainly silhouettes, flying milk bottles climbing toward formation. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Oberleutnant Ralph Hermischen's smirk as he watched the ungainly silhouettes climbing laboriously toward his formation through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190. A 5. The veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader, 26 years old, studied the American fighters making their combat debut over occupied Europe. "The armies have sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter at the sight of the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggling for altitude. Below them, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R 2,800 double Wasp engines straining against their 7-ton weight. To German pilots accustomed to the sleek Messerschmitt 109s and nimble Focke-Wulf 190s, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. Barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for their massive bodies, propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. What Hermischen didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling like wolves above could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would transform from objects of derision into instruments of terror, their 850 caliber Browning machine guns becoming the most feared sound in German skies. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. Each projectile weighed nearly 2 ounces, travelling at 2,900 feet per second. When all 8 guns fired simultaneously, they created a cone of destruction that no aircraft structure could survive. The transformation began that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. The former Eagle Squadron veteran, who had transferred from RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier, understood what his men didn't yet know: that survival in the P-47 required abandoning everything they thought they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt represented a radical departure from conventional fighter design philosophy. While the Germans had pursued lightweight interceptors optimized for climb and turn performance, Republic Aviation had created something unprecedented: a high-altitude juggernaut that used mass, power, and firepower to redefine the rules of aerial warfare. At 14,000 pounds fully loaded, it weighed more than some twin-engine bombers from the previous war. Among the 56 American pilots spread across the French sky that morning were men who would become legends, future aces whose names would strike fear into Luftwaffe hearts. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting continuously since 1939 with veterans of Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This story is about how industrial logic defeated tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality merged into overwhelming superiority, and how German pilots' laughter turned to terror as they discovered what synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. The weight difference alone told the story. A Focke-Wulf 190 weighed 5,700 pounds empty, while the P-47 tipped the scales at 9,900 pounds. That extra 1.5 tons represented armor plating, structural strength, and ammunition capacity that would rewrite the mathematics of aerial survival. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had emerged from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the US Army Air Force. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster that redefined the possible. It will be a dinosaur, Kartveli admitted to his design team as they studied the preliminary drawings. But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. The massive radial engine, the complex turbo supercharger system, the unprecedented armament package, every component pushed the boundaries of what engineers thought possible in a single-engine fighter. German intelligence, studying reconnaissance photographs of the first P-47 seconds arriving in England, dismissed them as training aircraft or perhaps medium bombers. No one could build a fighter that large and expect it to compete with refined European designs. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong their assumptions would prove. The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The massive turbo supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably asked the same question: this thing actually flies? Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R2000 800 double wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. The turbo supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere where the air was too thin for conventional superchargers. Major Hubert Hub Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, and dived with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47 seconds couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled, forcing turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Hauptmann Joseph Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter, "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets pretending to be warriors." The statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, the American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early encounters that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47 seconds that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. More significantly, when P-47 seconds did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of destruction that German pilots had never experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early war fighters or the cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The engineering behind this firepower represented American industrial philosophy perfectly. Each 50 caliber Browning machine gun weighed 64 pounds and measured 65 inches long. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel of mechanical precision, with electric boost motors preventing jamming during high-G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc with millisecond precision. German pilots, accustomed to the sharp crack of 20mm cannon, described the American weapons as sounding like Roosevelt's piano, a continuous, thunderous chord that meant death. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Luftwaffe veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without flinching began developing what medical officers would later classify as combat fatigue after encounters with Thunderbolts. At Republic Aviation's Farmingdale factory on Long Island, production was ramping up to unprecedented levels. Each aircraft required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, and precision tolerances measured in thousandths of inches. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, were assembling these complex machines faster than German factories could produce simple trainers. The transformation from mockery to terror had begun. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lazzo, France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron was returning from escort duty when his formation was bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers, taking catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit, the engine cowling was torn away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel, tried to bail out but discovered the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet, oil covering his windscreen, his engine shaking violently, controls responding only intermittently. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that vibrated the entire airframe, and flight controls that worked sporadically, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then, it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load without falling. The German repositioned and fired again, this time with only his machine guns, his cannon ammunition exhausted. Still, the massive American fighter flew on, trailing smoke and debris but maintaining altitude. The German pilot pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly. young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. The German repositioned for a third attack and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. 213mm rounds struck the aircraft at point-blank range. Still, impossibly, it flew. The German pilot pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition and unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief began counting bullet holes, but stopped after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head, leaving a crater in the armor plating. Another had detonated against the steel plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits from 20mm cannon shells. The control cables were partially severed, held together by individual strands of steel wire. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through completely. The hydraulic system had been destroyed. The electrical system was partially functional, and fuel was leaking from multiple punctures. Yet the aircraft had brought him home across 150 miles of hostile territory and open water. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shock waves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had fundamentally underestimated their own creation. The damage tolerance was beyond anything they had designed for, suggesting that the massive structure and redundant systems were providing protection margins they hadn't calculated. German intelligence, receiving combat reports from Jagdgeschwader 26, initially refused to believe the accounts. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment and survive. But testimony from multiple pilots, including the unknown German who had emptied his entire ammunition load into Johnson's fighter, confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver and lived. More disturbing for German commanders was the psychological impact on their pilots. The unknown German pilot reportedly returned to base visibly shaken, describing the encounter as unnatural and against all laws of physics. Other pilots began questioning their ammunition effectiveness and requesting heavier armament. The mythology of German fighter superiority was beginning to crack. Within weeks, Luftwaffe intelligence was distributing new tactical directives specifically addressing the P-47 threat. Pilots were instructed to attack only when ammunition was plentiful, to concentrate fire on specific areas rather than spraying rounds across the target, and to disengage immediately if the Thunderbolt survived the initial attack. The Americans had built something unprecedented, a fighter that could absorb punishment and survive. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve. This speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting impossible. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. The true revelation came during the August 17th, 1943 dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft positioning to attack B-17 seconds with their heavy cannon. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Hinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Me-110 seconds who survived, later recounted, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble, then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, tail severed. The crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 1-10 became nothing. 8 Messerschmitt 110s were destroyed in less than a minute. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 100 projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself revealed American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could maintain fire for over half a minute. The standard load mixed armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and standard ball ammunition designed to both destroy and ignite. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski described the effect. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality. The P-47's performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters, relying on mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190, A6, sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. When P-47 seconds of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report delivered to Reich Marshal Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, 1/2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades 13 feet in diameter. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at 2,200 feet per minute, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47 seconds to build energy faster in level flight. Hauptmann Heinrich Knoecker of Jagdgeschwader 11 encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year. The thunder of their engines has changed, deeper, more threatening." The paddle blade propeller changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47 seconds by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. By March 1944, P-47 seconds equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks, extending range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when loaded, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms immediately after dropping tanks. Major Gerhard Barkhorn, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, survived an encounter with P-47 seconds on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He later recalled, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the Sunday. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." The escort missions revealed another P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power settings that consumed fuel rapidly, the big American radials could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while maintaining enough fuel for combat and return. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack. The transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. The addition of bombs and rockets transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47 seconds provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans." Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn, 12 fighters from our Group A. I was the only one to return. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47 seconds systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks, and armoured vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in the Pacific theatre. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's qualities were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. On October 11, 1943, Colonel Neil Kirby led 4 P-47 seconds against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, shooting down 6 enemy planes himself in a single mission, earning him the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, accustomed to fighting nimble but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and durability. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered P-47 seconds over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying." The P-47 Newtons, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This variant would escort B-29 seconds to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon. Perhaps the ultimate vindication came in encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with its 540 mph top speed, should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch jets during takeoff and landing when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me 262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The jet pilot never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer's guns opened up at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape." By early 1945, specialized P-47 meters variants were deployed specifically to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, equipped with P-47Ms, shot down 2 Me-262 seconds in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. "The jets are faster, but they can't turn, and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery, and they come apart like they're made of paper." The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured German pilot pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D 42nd filled the flight line. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47 seconds during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components, machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Yet, American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded peacetime standards. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours total time by war's end. The quality showed in combat. In March 1945, Oberleutnant Joseph Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47 seconds as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials. His statement revealed the complete transformation. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever." Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage. And courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. German pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations that owned every altitude from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Bretschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47 seconds over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire staffel. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete. German pilots developed what medical officers called jabot fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing when Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47 seconds. The final statistics defied comprehension. In Europe, 3,752 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 3,315 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 86,000 railway cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 6,000 armoured fighting vehicles destroyed, 68,000 trucks destroyed. The 9th Air Force alone flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Behind these numbers lay the human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against Western Allied forces. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. At the Luftwaffe interrogation center, the file on the P-47 showed complete reversal. April 1943, assessment, minimal threat. March 1945, assessment, unsurvivable in direct engagement. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland was asked about the P-47. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat," we said. "They built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable, the visibility excellent. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet, they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time." The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The transformation from mockery to terror took less than 2 years. In that time, the flying milk bottle became the most feared aircraft in the Luftwaffe's experience. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits among other legendary fighters. Below a display case is a quote from an unnamed German pilot. "We laughed when we first saw them, fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you and you ceased to exist." The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. German pilots had laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. The P-47's design represented American industrial philosophy perfectly. Brute force engineering backed by unlimited resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount could withstand 12 G-forces. The control cables were doubled throughout, with automatic backup systems. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel of engineering. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, fed through electric boost motors to prevent jamming during high-G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude. Each gun had its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized. Even after the war, some German veterans maintained that the P-47 won through quantity, not quality, that German fighters were technically superior, but overwhelmed by numbers. The combat records tell a different story. In engagements where numbers were equal, P-47 seconds consistently prevailed. The heavy machine gun armament, dismissed as inferior to cannon, proved more effective in actual combat. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed why. Cannon shells, while individually more destructive, required precise aim and had limited ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds total. The P-47's weapons created a probability cloud of bullets that guaranteed hits even with imperfect aim. At typical engagement ranges, a 2-second burst put at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target. The ammunition itself was superior. American 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds used a delayed action fuse that ensured penetration before detonation. The incendiary compound burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite aluminum structure. German 20mm shells often exploded on surface contact, causing spectacular but sometimes superficial damage. The fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal flight, up to 300 gallons in combat with water injection engaged. The 9th Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly by late 1944. Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat. German pilots were entering combat with less than 100 hours total time by war's end. The quality showed in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's capabilities and limitations. They knew their aircraft systems intimately. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, exemplified the American training advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, studied gun camera film from actual combat. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight of 10,000 pounds exceeded the gross weight of some twin-engine fighters. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war. Its weapons delivered more firepower than a squad of infantry. Yet it was built by the thousands, flown by kids barely out of high school. The transformation of German opinion from mockery to terror took less than 2 years. In that time, the flying milk bottle became the most feared aircraft in the Luftwaffe's experience. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without flinching spoke of P-47 seconds in hushed tones decades after the war. Beyond the technical specifications lay the human dimension. The aircraft attracted aggressive, determined pilots willing to press attacks home despite overwhelming odds. These men understood that the Thunderbolt was not a dogfighter but a heavy hitter, designed to deliver devastating blows rather than dance around opponents. Colonel Francis Gabreski, the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the mindset: you had to think differently in the Thunderbolt. It wasn't about being the most maneuverable or the fastest climber. It was about using your strengths, firepower, altitude performance, and structural integrity to impose your will on the enemy. The psychological warfare aspect was equally important. The distinctive sound of the Thunderbolt's engine, particularly the paddle blade variants, became a weapon in itself. German ground troops learned to identify the approaching aircraft by its thunderous roar, diving for cover before the first rockets streaked earthward. By war's end, the P-47 had fundamentally changed the nature of aerial combat. No longer was air superiority about nimble fighters dancing in the sky. The Thunderbolt proved that concentrated firepower, structural strength, and industrial capacity could overwhelm traditional fighter virtues. It was a lesson that would influence fighter design for decades to come. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them Jabbo's fighter bombers, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47 seconds provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans." Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn, 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47 seconds systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks, and armoured vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armour, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armour, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian wrote in his memoirs, "The Thunderbolt became the symbol of our helplessness. Day after day, these aircraft hunted our convoys like wolves pursuing sheep. No movement was safe." American pilots developed sophisticated tactics specifically for ground attack missions. They would approach targets at high altitude to avoid detection, then dive at steep angles to deliver their ordnance with devastating accuracy. Captain Robert Johnson became equally famous for his ground attack missions. His combat diary from July 1944 recorded spotted German armour moving near Caen, rolled inverted and dove from 15,000 feet, pulled out at 500 feet after releasing both 1,000-pounders. Direct hits on 2 Panther tanks. The psychological warfare aspect proved as important as the physical destruction. German soldiers developed an almost pathological fear of clear skies. The distinctive sound of the paddle blade propeller became synonymous with death from above. Feldwebel Werner Krupp of the 2nd Panzer Division described the terror. You could hear them coming from kilometers away, that deep, thunderous roar that made your bones vibrate. Then the screaming of the rockets, the hammering of the machine guns. Men would break and run before the first bomb fell. The P-47's ground attack capabilities reached their peak during the Falaise Pocket operation in August 1944, when Allied forces trapped the remnants of German Army Group B in Normandy. Thunderbolts worked in relays, maintaining continuous pressure on the trapped German forces. Over 7,000 German vehicles were destroyed or abandoned in the pocket. Photographs taken after the battle showed roads clogged with the burned-out hulks of tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces. German survivors described the experience as the end of the world. The success of P-47 ground attack operations fundamentally changed military doctrine. For the first time in history, air power had achieved decisive results on the battlefield through direct attack on enemy forces. The P-47 had achieved something that armies and artillery could not: the complete paralysis of enemy logistics. By September 1944, German military commanders understood that daylight movement was impossible wherever Allied air forces operated. The flying milk bottle that German pilots had once mocked had become the instrument of their defeat. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47 seconds systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armoured vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armour, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armour, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. General Oberst Heinz Guderian wrote in his memoirs, "The Thunderbolt became the symbol of our helplessness. Day after day, these aircraft hunted our convoys, like wolves pursuing sheep. No movement was safe." American pilots developed sophisticated tactics specifically for ground attack missions. They would approach targets at high altitude to avoid detection, then dive at steep angles to deliver their ordnance with devastating accuracy. Captain Robert Johnson became equally famous for his ground attack missions. His combat diary from July 1944 recorded, "Spotted German armour moving near Caen, rolled, inverted, and dove from 15,000 feet, pulled out at 500 feet after releasing both 1,000-pounders. Direct hits on 2 Panther tanks." The psychological warfare aspect proved as important as the physical destruction. German soldiers developed an almost pathological fear of clear skies. The distinctive sound of the paddle blade propeller became synonymous with death from above. Feldwebel Werner Krupp of the 2nd Panzer Division described the terror. You could hear them coming from kilometers away, that deep, thunderous roar that made your bones vibrate. Then the screaming of the rockets, the hammering of the machine guns. Men would break and run before the first bomb fell. The P-47's ground attack capabilities reached their peak during the Falaise Pocket operation in August 1944, when Allied forces trapped the remnants of German Army Group B in Normandy. Thunderbolts worked in relays, maintaining continuous pressure on the trapped German forces. Over 7,000 German vehicles were destroyed or abandoned in the pocket. Photographs taken after the battle showed roads clogged with the burned-out hulks of tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces. German survivors described the experience as the end of the world. The success of P-47 ground attack operations fundamentally changed military doctrine. For the first time in history, air power had achieved decisive results on the battlefield through direct attack on enemy forces. The P-47 had achieved something that armies and artillery could not: the complete paralysis of enemy logistics. By September 1944, German military commanders understood that daylight movement was impossible wherever Allied air forces operated. The flying milk bottle that German pilots had once mocked had become the instrument of their defeat. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat," we said. "They built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand." The Americans built an American fighter designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win. They were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable, the visibility excellent. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of lead. The massive fighter that German pilots had dismissed as a flying milk bottle became the hammer that shattered their air force. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits among other legendary fighters. Below a display case containing spent .50 caliber shells is a quote from an unnamed German pilot. "We laughed when we first saw them, fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you and you ceased to exist." The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had proven that in warfare, as in industry, American solutions were not always elegant, but they were devastatingly effective. Brute force, applied with precision and backed by unlimited resources, had triumphed over finesse and tradition. German pilots had laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. The transformation was complete, the lesson learned, and the victory absolute. 8 guns had changed everything.